colors, Mrs. Heels here with your next art lesson. Today we are going to do some watercolor techniques practice. So today is just a practice day, and I'm going to show you how to set up your paper and all the different techniques we're going to practice in a minute. But first I wanted to show you, to give you the why we're practicing watercolor techniques. We're going to eventually draw and paint a chameleon in watercolor and some tropical leaves, because chameleons live in warmer subtropical or tropical climates. But I wanted to show you some things that are possible with watercolor paint. So I have just a few paintings that I wanted to show you. You can be super expressive with watercolors, or you can do like hyper realism, which looks more like a photograph. So I wanted to show you some possibilities with watercolor paints. This watercolor painting is very abstract. It's about color and movement and the paint and light. This painting is another watercolor painting. You can see that a rabbit or a hare has started to take shape, but the left side is very abstract and splotchy. We know who this is. So this is an expressive portrait of the Joker. This is a very famous American painter named Winslow Homer. He painted a lot of pictures of people on water. This is a contemporary artist from China, and I think it almost looks like a photograph. And then here we have an example of what we call hyperrealism or photorealism, where it really looks like a photograph, but it's a watercolor painting. Now, of course, all those paintings take lots of years of practice and determination and patience and mistakes. Lots of mistakes, I'm sure, were made before those artists were able to make artwork that looked like that. But we've got to start somewhere. So this is where we're going to start today. You need a 12 by 18 white piece of drawing paper and a paintbrush, and you need your watercolor palette, and you need a tissue, and you need that's it, water cup, paintbrush, a tissue. The other two things that I would like for you to get are, this is isopropyl alcohol. Rubbing alcohol is better because it has a higher alcohol content, but this alcohol works also. And then you need some kosher salt or some larger grain salt. Table salt works as well. It doesn't work as good, but it also works. So you're not going to use very much of these things. You're just going to use teeny tiny little parts of them. If you don't have either one of those things, that's fine. You'll just skip those two sections at the end. All right, boys and girls, let me show you how to get your paper set up so we can start practicing. This is what we're aiming for, a piece of paper with 10 squares on it, numbered 1 through 10. Now, why would I put a quarter there? Am I going to pay you for doing this? No, I'm not going to pay you for doing this. That's for scale, so you can see about how big your squares should be. Of course, they could always be a little bit bigger. But basically, you just want to organize 10 different squares on your rectangular piece of paper. My paper is organized or oriented horizontally, which means it's wide like the horizon from left to right. So I'm drawing my squares in Sharpie, or you can draw them in pencil. It doesn't matter. And then I'm going to number my squares so that it's easier for you to follow along with me with what you're doing. Square 1 is wet paint on dry paper. So just make some marks, lines, blobs, zigzags, polka dots with your paint on dry paper. Square 2, you're going to wet your square with clear water, and then you're going to put 2 different colors, one on each side, and you're going to see what happens when they bleed together in the middle. It's a good idea to go ahead and get all of the colors in your watercolor palette wet with some clear water. That way, if you want to use them, the paint will be ready to go. Squares 3 and 4, you're going to layer colors. And because we're doing chameleons, I wanted you to see what green over yellow looks like, and also what yellow paint over green looks like. On the left-hand side, we're gonna let both of those squares dry a little bit, but on the left-hand side, your paper's gonna be damp when you put the colors over. And then on the right-hand side of each square, your paper will be dry when you put those two colors over top. Square 5 is where you draw with materials that are going to resist or push away the paint. So right now I'm doing some things in circles with pink crayon, and then I'm going to take a light teal oil pastel and do a squiggly line and some circles or dots. And when I paint over these two areas, see which material pushes away the paint better, if it's the crayon or the oil pastel. Which one do you think it's going to be? The oil pastels have more oil in them. So if you guessed oil pastel, you were right. Crayons actually have wax in them, and that's not as resistant to water as the oil is in oil pastels. So in square 6, I want you to make up your own color. I mixed two different reds, like a orangish red and a red with a turquoisey brighter blue. And I got this plummy color. You should mix up whatever colors you're curious about. In square 7, I'm going to paint around this star shape. It could be any shape that I drew in there. I just want you to see what it feels like to actually paint around a shape and try not to get the paint in that shape. If you want to go back later and paint in that shape when the yellow paint is dry, that's fine. Up in square number 2, we saw what happens when you put wet paint next to wet paint. Your colors bleed together. All right, now I'm gonna put green over my yellow and yellow over my green, and those squares are still a little bit damp. Watercolors are translucent. Luce, L-U-C-E, or lucent means light. Trans means something passes through or through. So translucent means that you're gonna be able to see colors layered on top of each other because they're not clear, but they let light through. So square 8, I'm going to put thick paint down and blot it up or pull up sections with my tissue. I wanted to see what that looked like when I did that on the yellow in square number 4 too. Anytime you're going to blot paint or add salt or alcohol to it, you've got to do it really quickly before it dries. You want the paint to still be wet and drippy if you're going to add something to it or take it away. So this is the salt that I am going to sprinkle into my wet paint. You have to sprinkle it. You can't drop bunches of it. You want it to be almost like it's coming out of a salt shaker, but it's the kind of salt that's too fat to come out or too big. The flakes are too fat or big to come out of a salt shaker. So you want to get a lot of thick, juicy paint on your paintbrush, any color you want. And you want to work very quickly because you want it to still be wet. And here I am sprinkling. Now what's going to happen is the salt is going to absorb the pigment from the paint, and you're going to let that dry for like a couple hours. So probably next class when you come in, you will brush that, or the next time you do art, you will brush that salt into the trash can, and you'll see these little irregularly shaped dots or blobs where the salt has soaked the pigment up. Now, in square number 10, you're going to use the alcohol technique. It can either be rubbing alcohol or it can be the isopropyl alcohol. So you're going to, again, use really juicy, thick paint. So lots of paint and lots of water inside your bristles of your brush. Paint in your square. And then really, really quickly before that dries, you want to put a little bit of rubbing alcohol with a different paintbrush in a few sections of square number 10. I like to do like kind of random polka dots because if I was going to do a chameleon, if I was going to use this technique for chameleon skin, that's probably what I would do. I would do random polka dots. So you got to use a smaller or a different clean brush, or you can use a Q-tip, and you're going to put that rubbing alcohol down in a few areas. And what it does is it pushes the pigment away from those areas. So it looks like polka dots. All right, boys and girls, those are your 10 different techniques I'd like for you to practice. I'm going to leave this. I want you to freeze this next screen and leave it up so you can remember all the techniques. And I've written underneath each square what you're supposed to do. If you don't have rubbing alcohol or salt, you have lots of options for things you can do. You can take some Elmer's glue and let it dry. Make a little drawing with Elmer's glue there, or you could even try glue stick. I don't know if that works, but And then you can let that dry and then paint over it and see what happens. Sometimes glue can act as a resist or a masking area. Um, you can mix up different colors that you mix 3 colors together on your palette to see what you get. Or you can try layering different colors. So put down red, wait for it to dry, put green over that, see what color you get, put yellow over that, see what color you get. So if you don't have kosher salt or coarse salt or alcohol, you can still play around and experiment in those other 2 squares. All right, have fun experimenting and practicing and learning new things today, and I will see you next class.